anyone who knows me, I'm not really into scary movies. The most I could tolerate is The Sixth Sense and The Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. that's about as much as I could take. But since Halloween is right around the corner, why not talk about something like Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, starring Janet Leigh, Martin Balsam, and Anthony Perkins. Really, what can I add to about Psycho? Like with all these other movies, my own experience will suffice. First time I remember hearing about Psycho was in the movie Looney Tunes Back in Action, where Jenna Elfman walks into the bathroom, seeing Bugs Bunny in the shower.
Doesn't anyone knock anymore?
When I watch that scene in Psycho, it's hard for me to not think about that. I half expect her to go, doesn't anybody knock anymore? And then I would say about 5 or 6 years after that, in my psychology class in high school, my psychology teacher showed us the scene from Psycho where it's revealed that Norman Bates is actually acting as his mother. I wasn't really into horror stuff at the time, but since we were talking about split personality disorder, he felt that it was a good opportunity to showcase the movie for us. And then when I watched it a few years after that, I already knew what the twist was, but I didn't know exactly how it led up to that. And that's what really riveted me, because this movie, like with a lot of slasher films, and as others have pointed out over time, this movie is really great, and it still holds up so well all these years later. But you guys know what the plot of this movie is. It's about a woman played by Janet Leigh who plays Marion Crane, who steals $40,000 from her employer and then goes on the run into Southern California. Then she settles at the famous Bates Hotel, where she meets Norman Bates, who's kept on a tight leash by his mother, who's an invalid living in his mansion nearby the hotel. Marion later that night is killed in the shower. Then Marion's sister and her lover decide to head over to the Bates Motel to investigate. Now, as I said earlier with scary movies, I don't have the stomach for them. It's horror-related stuff, I couldn't get into it as a kid, and even now, it makes my stomach churn. Though there are some exceptions, like I've said. I really like M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense, even though that's more of a supernatural thriller. And some films, like the Spider-Man movies, the Sam Raimi ones at least, they have some horror elements in them. But as someone who really likes good movies, this I could definitely say is worth seeing. As I'm sure others have pointed out, what really works about this movie is the way that Alfred Hitchcock utilizes the remote location aspect of this film, where help is so far away, a phone call is far away, and then there's that odd, quiet person who's working at the hotel, and there's only a sparse amount of characters that get focused on, like Marion Crane, her sister, and her lover Sam, and the private investigator that goes to check on Norman Bates, and Norman Bates himself, who's one of the best horror villains that's ever been used in the horror genre, and in any movie that's ever come out in cinema. Alfred Hitchcock directs this with such great skill, and doesn't show any of the violence. All we really get are glimpses, and we hear certain sounds that come with it. Like when Norman Bates, disguised as his mother, stabs Marion in the shower, and you hear the sounds of the knife hitting her skin. It's the suggestion of violence, the allowing your brain to fill the gaps in your own mind, just like certain aspects of the movie Seven, directed by David Fincher. And that's not in any way to say that violence isn't scary, if you do it in a way that makes it effective. Sometimes, though, less is more. And you could say less is always more, but I'm a middle ground kind of guy, what can I say? In this case, though, I'd say it pays off, including the scene where the private investigator's killed by Norman Bates. Although the way he falls backwards down the stairs, it's pretty obvious that he's just doing the motion in front of a backdrop. Nevertheless, though, it still works really well. And those of you who don't know, the blood that we see on the bathtub after Marion dies, Alfred Hitchcock actually used chocolate syrup and spilled it onto the bathtub floor in order to give it the effect that blood was draining from her body. Since it was black and white, nobody was going to be able to notice the difference anyway. Janet Leigh's really good as Marion Crane, and for those of you who don't know, in real life, she's actually Jamie Lee Curtis's mom. And she's actually the fake-out protagonist of this movie, because after that opening credits, the movie slows down and it gives you time to focus on her, seeing her love life, her work life, and how she decides to steal the money and go on the run. It's all basic stuff that you need to know about her character, the important information in order to get invested into the plot when it kicks up later on. Then there's Anthony Perkins, who plays Norman Bates. Really great, and he's probably the sole reason why this movie still holds up all these years later, because if it was anybody else, it wouldn't have worked as well. Normally in a movie like this, you would expect somebody like Norman Bates to not be that attractive and just kind of dorky looking. Anthony Perkins is actually the opposite of that, and he's very charming too, despite his quiet and sheepish demeanor. And as an audience member, you can't really help but feel sorry for him, because it looks like he's really on a strict leash with his mom, who's very mean to him, doesn't really seem that loving to him anyway, but yet he still feels indebted to her because he is her son. As he famously says,
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Even though he's covering up what his mother's doing, you can't really help but feel for his predicament. So inevitably, Janet's sister and her lover decide to go out to Bates Motel, distract Norman Bates, and get the answers from Norman Bates' mom. But then Marion's sister finds the mother in the basement of the house, only to discover that it's an actual dead corpse. And then Norman Bates shows up, ready to kill her, dressed up as his mom. But then Sam comes to the rescue and stops him. And it's the next scene where the movie starts to lose me a little bit, because it's the explanation that we get from the psychiatrist, who explains to the characters in the room, and essentially to us, the audience, that Norman Bates has a split personality disorder. He was acting like his mother. He felt very resentful because of certain things that happened in their past. Now, considering at the time in 1960, that kind of stuff wasn't really common knowledge back then, so I understand whoever made that decision, why they had to put that in there, because they were afraid that audiences wouldn't get it. And also, to my knowledge, audiences back then were blown away by that twist. Nowadays, it probably wouldn't be as shocking, but considering where cinema was at that time, I totally get why. It's not a huge deal breaker for me, but still, at the same time, I can't help but say after a while, yeah, okay, I get it. Then you get the famous shot of Norman Bates sitting in the prison cell, hearing his mother's voice in his head, and then you see the glimpse of the skull fading into his own face, and then the car being pulled out of the mud, and then the movie ends. So, in conclusion, calling Psycho a classic, that's a bit of an overstatement, but hey, it's true. A slasher film that's set in a remote location, but yet told in a very interesting way that audiences hadn't seen at that time. And in a lot of ways today in 2020, we don't really see that often. If you're into the horror genre, if you're into scary movies, or if you haven't seen it yet, by all means, give it a watch. I guarantee you, it'll definitely be worth your time. Those are my thoughts on Psycho. What are your guys' thoughts on the movie? Do you love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? Whatever the case is, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Have a great Halloween, and I'll see you all very soon.